Good. So welcome to our December web debate. As usual, we meet on the first Tuesday in the month to discuss issues in diplomacy and diplomatic practice. We aim to give food for thought to practitioners and scholars alike. But I guess most importantly, we aim to give inspiration and new ideas to the next generation of young diplomats. As you know, the debate is organized by Diplo Foundation in the framework of the International Forum on Diplomatic Training. My name is Katharina Höhne. I'm a research associate with Diplo Foundation, and I will be moderating. So today, we meet to discuss digital diplomacy and the influence of new actors and new technology in diplomatic practice. Among the questions we're asking is, what are the digital strategies of ministries of foreign affairs? And how have they adopted to social media, and how have they adopted social media as part of their communication campaigns and their public diplomacy efforts? Further, is digital diplomacy more than simply being on Twitter or Facebook? Many agree that social media is a potential tool for diplomacy, but has social media changed the very environment in which diplomacy is practiced? So, for example, has it really empowered new kinds of actors such as civil society, which is an argument we quite often hear? Last but not least, now I think that the hype surrounding social media is settling down. We perhaps can get a more sobering look on digital diplomacy and the use of social media in diplomacy. And basically the question is, should diplomats be on Twitter or Facebook in the first place? Or perhaps is it time to abandon this as an outdated fashion trend? I'm sure our speakers for today have something to say about that. And we're extremely proud to have two very accomplished speakers with us. So we have Ms. Liz Galvez, who's a former senior diplomat with the British Foreign and Commonwealth Office. She looks back on 33 years of a career, and in her teaching and consulting with ministries of foreign affairs, she now focuses on digital diplomacy and negotiation skills. We're also extremely happy to have her as a lecturer in actually a number of our courses. We also have with us Ambassador Stefano Baldi. He is an Italian career diplomat and currently ambassador of Italy to Bulgaria. Until last year, he was head of the Diplomatic Institute of the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And from that perspective, I'm sure he has a lot to share on social media practices. Before I hand the floor to Liz and Stefano for their introductory remarks, I would like to encourage your participation. Please do share your questions, thoughts, and comments as they arise during our discussion in the chat window that you can see on the left-hand side. This is really important because in the second half of our hour together, we will engage in a Q&A, and for that, your comments and your questions are crucial. So basically, please don't hesitate to share your ideas, thoughts, comments, and questions. But now, without further ado, I would like to hand over to Stefano and Liz. And I must admit, I'm not sure which one of you is going to start. I'm not sure if we have agreed on that. Is there anyone who would like to go
I propose Liz to start. And in the meantime, I open the curtains because Liz has a lot of light, I'm not too much light, so I will try to compete with her.
Okay, I think we have an agreement there, so let us get started.
Okay, I will start. I wanted to talk about the changed context in which diplomatic communication is taking place, and specifically the use of social media in public diplomacy work. In particular, I'm going to suggest that a lack of clarity about what social media can and cannot do for diplomacy is leading many ministries just to take a scattergun approach to using social media, which has little discernible effect on public opinion. So is it time for foreign ministries to go back to a more focused approach to public diplomacy, where social media is only one of the tools used and not the primary instrument of communication? Now, it's taken diplomats a while to get to grips with social media in the first place. and with embracing it. Up to about 10 years ago, of course, as we know, governments were in effect, the creators of information about their policies and their positions, and could to a certain degree set the information agenda. Of course, the big media corporations would have their say, but at least it was this kind of information could be easily monitored by governments and by embassies in foreign countries, and whether views were negative or positive, governments could then decide how to address those reactions. Of course, now we have seen this explosion of cross-border digital communication. So setting the agenda is no longer in the control of governments, and it's not even under control of the large media corporations. There was a report in March, I think, of this year by the Tao Center for Digital Journalism at Columbia University, and they said the influence of social media platforms and technology companies is having a greater effect on American journalism than even the shift from print to digital. The takeover of traditional publishing roles by Facebook, Snapchat, Google, and Twitter raises serious questions about the future of journalism. These companies have evolved beyond their role as distribution channels and now control what audiences see and who gets paid for their attention, and even what format and type of journalism flourishes. So that's now the news environment in which governments are trying to operate. At the same time, you've got these technological developments like high-speed broadband, Wi-Fi, mobile devices, etc. So the scope and volume of communication between individuals has just mushroomed beyond belief. That if you've got the world population is 7 billion plus, half of them are on the internet, a third of them are using social media of some sort or another, nearly all of those on mobile devices. So again, that is your potential audience if you're going to be on social media. So the main changes, I would say, in behavior because of all those developments, information is traveling at a speed which organizations are finding it difficult to keep up with regard to listening to what's out there and responding quickly enough, especially if you're operating within a system that has very time-consuming approval processes for any kind of public communication. Katerina mentioned the new actors on the world stage who are getting involved in policy areas that used to be the preserve of officials. So you've got a much broader stage in which governments are operating, and foreign ministries are having to influence a much broader range of people. Some of these new actors are destructive, as we know, like ISIS. They spread violence, they incite hatred, etc. You have a range of non-state actors using social media to create their own networks, whether it's academics or private sector companies. Some sectors like tourism find social media very useful, cultural organizations, ditto, even religious organizations. I think Pope Francis is the second most followed head of state in the world after President Trump, the non-official President Trump. And I think he's now just opened an Instagram account and is now the second most followed leader on that. So even religious organizations are seeing the value. On the other hand, we're also seeing this proliferation of fake news providers. So you either have those people who are creating clickbait material to make money, and people always talk about teenagers in Macedonia. I'm sure it's not only teenagers in Macedonia doing this, but that's an example that's always used. But there are also organizations who are disseminating disinformation for more sinister purposes. So to undermine a government or a set of values or whatever it may be. we're seeing that fake profiles and cyber bots now are part of our world, and we haven't really grasped how to deal with that. Now, propaganda itself is not a new phenomenon, but the way of disseminating it and the speed now with which it's disseminated is something that is relatively new, and we haven't got to grips with that. At the same time now, you've got end users of information are also providers of information and of visual images. But it seems to me, I don't have any evidence for saying this, but it seems to me that in many cases, the people that put information online are more interested in going viral and collecting followers, and they're less bothered about whether the story they're reproducing is true or not true, which is where the fake news providers have a ready audience, of course. But at the same time as people are producing information, they're actually restricting their own sources of information. They're using filter bubbles. So they're not actually looking for contrary opinions. They're just looking for opinions that will validate their own opinions. So in a way, the internet is actually closing minds rather than opening them. So what does officialdom do? Well, as I've said right at the beginning, I think although diplomatic institutions were quite slow to get to grips with social media, now they've all jumped on the social media bandwagon. If you think that 90%, I think, of all foreign ministries are now on social media, most on Twitter, almost as many on Facebook. Fewer are using YouTube and Instagram. Some are using Periscope and Snapchat. Somebody needs to explain to me why Snapchat is useful for diplomats. I don't understand that at all. But there is this tendency now for foreign ministries and ambassadors to be told, you must have a Twitter account, you must use Twitter, you must be on Twitter, you must put things on your Facebook account. So people are doing this. You know, I think Europeans prefer Twitter, Asian foreign ministries prefer Facebook. I think the Foreign Ministry of India claimed that their Facebook page is the most followed foreign ministry Facebook page in the world. A number of foreign embassies are active on Weibo in China. Some foreign ministries will use blogs. A few have entered the world of emojis, with Finland using these emojis to celebrate their chairmanship of the Arctic Council. The point, this is all very well, all this activity is fine, it's all well and good. What is the point of it? Is it a public diplomacy purpose? Is it just a broadcasting purpose? Or is it just to show that they're modern and up to date and with the trends? I have my doubts about how effective social media is alone in public diplomacy terms. If you look at the modern view of public diplomacy, it's supposed to include short-term advocacy. Of course, social media is good for that. The medium-term brand development, perhaps, and then long-term building of relationships. How does social media create long-term relationships? I would argue that it doesn't. And that unless you have a sustained brand, Stefano is shaking his head, you can respond. But I think that other than in the short term, social media doesn't have a huge amount to contribute to public diplomacy. In the short term, I accept that it is very useful for presenting positions. It's invaluable for raising awareness of a situation and for giving a response to a particular situation. But as regards engagement, as regards influence, I'm skeptical. one of the most common criticisms of the Bush administration was that they didn't listen to what people were saying about them, that they didn't understand what the world thought about them. So everyone started talking about the importance of public diplomacy was to engage, was to hear and to adjust your messaging in the light of what people were saying about you. How many ministries are in fact doing that in any depth? And do ministries have the resources to engage in that kind of big data analysis that would give you a clear picture of what a country thinks about you? I mean, Stefano can tell us how he works in Bulgaria and the opinion of Bulgarians about Italy. So he'll probably contradict everything I've said. But I think there is a risk, though. There is a risk that there is so much dependence on social media, and so many ministries are putting their resources into creating Twitter accounts and keeping their accounts up to date and making sure that the latest position is online somewhere for people to read, that they've lost sight, I think, of who are you trying to influence and why are you trying to influence. And it's not a popularity contest. What you're trying to do is to get people to understand your country and your policies and to agree with the positions that you're taking. I mean, does it, can social media, can a very quick response to, say, that awful story about the slave markets in Libya, or the latest rounds of killing in Syria, or some other terrible situation like that, there are 500,000 refugees in Bangladesh, can a very short series of tweets actually encapsulate the gravity of a situation like that and the depth of feeling and the intentions of response from governments? I think we run the risk of dumbing down foreign policy if we are so fixated on social media to the exclusion of other channels of communication and other tools of public diplomacy. I'm going to stop there, partly because I nearly lost my picture. But I just wanted to say that to conclude by saying that I think it's time for public diplomats of foreign ministries to go back to the more tried and tested ways of public diplomacy. So you don't abandon social media. I'm not saying we do without social media. I think it has to remain there, but it has to be kept within its place. But there is still a role for building up networks of influence with people in foreign countries, whether this is business sector, civil society leaders, faith leaders. Try to have some more personal, direct, face-to-face contact with people who shape the opinions of their own population. And there should be more of a concerted effort to harness soft power of other non-state actors in your own country, people who share your own interest in promoting your own government. And these need to be pulled into a strategy, and social media remains, but only as one strand and not as the primary instrument. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Liz. A very, very useful introduction. And if you look at the chat, there's already a really, really intense discussion going on in the chat, ranging from questions such as what should be the strategy for foreign ministries be? Should they even engage with social media? To what extent is social media engagement actually harming creativity and innovation? Then we move on to topics of fake news, the role of algorithms, filter bubbles. So there's a lot already coming through the chat, which is really, really amazing to see. And what I also gather from your introduction, Liz, and what I gather from lots of the comments in the chat is that all of us seem to have a very cautious and almost critical perspective now on the use of social media. It seems that we all agree it is useful to an extent, but the perspective, it seems, is a lot more critical than it used to be. Having said that, I would like to hand over to Stefano for his perspective.
Yes, thank you, Liz, and thank you, Katarina. I don't think I will really talk about what I wanted to say, because there are so many things on the table already that I don't want to add anymore. I would rather react, because I heard a picture that I partially say share, but there are other parts which I believe are not my view and are not certainly my experience. There are some premises where I have problems. Also, they were mentioned on initial discussion. There was one thing at the beginning which was saying the obsession with social media has limited creativity and innovation in digital diplomacy. I have problems with this statement, to be honest, and this also in a way touches with what Liz was saying. I don't think there is any obsession around. I think there is just an observation of what's going on. This is diplomats, let's say they arrived late, as usual, especially in communication. And then they think they have discovered something new, which is not. This is something which has been already going on. In another comment, there was, this has been going on for 10 years. Yes, correct. Except that the intensive use, if we can call it so, by diplomacy, I think it dates back the last 4 or 5 years, not more, certainly not more, even less. So, in a way, I think diplomats are quite new to the use of social media. And therefore, they are not certainly acquainted with the tool. I would say the hype is still there. And why I'm saying this? Because I think there is a lot of creativity and innovation in digital diplomacy that can still, I mean, referring to social media at least, that can still be applied. And there are really very different situations between countries, but huge. I mean, there are few countries which have developed quite extensively the use of social media in digital diplomacy or in diplomacy. And there are many others which are still trying to emulate or to find a way on how to use it. So we are really at an early stage, I would say, of using. If you compare with the use that is being done in the business, or even in some parts of social or civil society, diplomacy is very much behind. So there is a lot of innovation which can be still applied in diplomacy. It's not innovation, in absolute terms, but in diplomacy, yes. So, and then among the many other things which I heard, they are not in order. Digital diplomacy, of course, it's far more than social media. So I'm not now. I think we should. The title until there, it's a bit misleading about the discussion. I think it has already mentioned many times the social media. So I would focus on the social media. But if we want another time, we talk about the rest, which is quite a lot on the differences in digital diplomacy. But I think it's fascinating, the social media side. Why it's fascinating? Because this will go on for some time more, as long as there won't be something new. When we will get to Web 3.0, which I don't know what it will be like, maybe we will speak less about social media. Like now, we speak less about websites. Now we take that for granted. That's given. When there was Web 1.0, we were discussing, but shall we use so much the website? Shall we use resources for the websites. Shall we reorganize our system for the websites? Now this is not the discussion anymore. Now the discussion is social media, which means that we are still learning what to do with the social media. Why it's creative social media? I give you an example, just an example, on how far we still have to go. I think in many ministries of foreign affairs, and the social media use is still seen as something which is fragmented, which means, you know, there are some embassies which are more advanced, there are some people who are using more, there is the minister who is using it more or less, and it depends. So they don't see the picture. There are some others, though, which are already very good at using this, and they are now organizing more and more some kind of campaigns. When you talk about campaign in a Ministry of Foreign Affairs, this is something which, you know, it's already well known by many NGOs, for example. They do, or some business. Not in the ministries, but even in the ministries we need campaigns for whatever it is, you know, the death penalty, or a campaign for the, you know, for the fashion in such and such country, whatever it is. Organizing a campaign with the social media, it's quite a challenge, especially if you have a network like Ministry of Foreign Affairs have. And it's a huge, big thing, which now has a different way. It was already in the past also traditional ways, but now it's far more complex, but also far more outreaching. We keep forgetting that by the use of social media, we can outreach a number of people, a number of single persons that was unthinkable of, you know, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, even with the websites. So these are the, I think, the things that we should be keeping in mind as an opportunity for the ministries. I have many other things to say, but I think we should. There are many things ongoing in the chat. I leave it to you, Katerina, to select them, and certainly there will be possibility to have other reactions on what is being you know, asked or observed. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefano. I mean, as you said, there's a lot going on in the chat and a lot to be discussed. There's one particular starting point that I find particularly interesting because it talks directly to how social media can be used or is used as a tool by diplomats. And that is this question of, are diplomats information that then is to be consumed, or are they actually engaging in a dialogue? And to what extent can they engage in a dialogue? There have been a couple of participants in the chat who have raised this point, so I can't do justice to them by naming them in person. But some advocated that basically diplomats should not, cannot focus on actually engaging in a conversation on social media, such as Facebook or Twitter. Others have said they looked at the posts of ministries of foreign affairs on Facebook, and it is not engaging at all. It is literally just a way of sending out information. And then others have said, well, the holy grail really is to engage in a conversation on social media, and that's what diplomats should be aiming for. What is your take on this? What should be the strategy, or what should be the way of engaging as diplomats with social media? Should it be one way, two way? What are the consequences of both? And what is your recommendation, basically? I don't know who wants to start. I leave it up to you.
Stefano, you start.
I can start, yes, with pleasure, because I will say something which not necessarily is, you know, along the mainstream. This issue of the interaction on social media is, of course, one of the characteristics of social media. But it shouldn't become a totem, you know, it shouldn't become something where if you don't do it, if you don't engage, then you are not using social media properly. Because when we accept that you are to outreach a lot of people And there I see Paramjit was saying, is it effective or not? You know, on the effectiveness we could discuss for days. Even when we have meetings, personal meetings, are they effective or not? So, but that's another point. I would say, if you accept that you have to reach a lot of people, then you have to accept that there is a lot of diversity in these people. And you have to accept that some people, they are, not only they don't think as you do, which is acceptable, but some of them are just there for other reasons, for strange reasons, or they just come out with all the funniest things in the world, or the craziest thing in the world. So I think for this kind of people, there is no need to engage, because time has a value, and nobody wants to waste his time. So unfortunately, and this is one of the weaknesses of these tools, in many cases, those who are more vocal are those who have you know, very peculiar ideas, or they're just there to be destructive. Let's put it this way. So I think in this case, it's not the role of the digital diplomacy to respond. In case it's the role of of civil society or politicians, we are an institution, and we should be institutional. So we shouldn't think that the final aim of our presence online on the social media is to interact. I don't think this is the case. And most of the time, you don't have you know, any kind of requests. I mean, you post something on Facebook, and you get 3 comments or 2 comments. Is that a failure? Does it mean that that is not working well? You post some crazy things, and you will get 1,000 comments. Is that a success? We are an institution. We should act as an institution. So this is my answer on the interaction or not. There is no final valuation that you should or should not interact. It very much depends on what.
I agree with that, actually. I think it depends what the topic is that you've been asked to engage on. I think if you have one negative comment on a Twitter feed, is it worth engaging with that person and having this rather sterile debate? I do think that what can be useful is blogs. Very few foreign ministries use blogs. The Foreign Office likes blogs, and some of its bloggers are exceptionally skilled at writing blogs that people read. There was one ambassador I knew in Central Europe who said that all the opinion formers, decision makers in that country would read his weekly blog. He didn't bother with Twitter because people in that country didn't use Twitter. People do engage in Facebook in that part of the world for political comment. The political leaders, civil society, protest movements, everything is on Twitter and quite detailed. But he would write on his blog because that is where he could actually get into detail about certain things that he wanted to address. And he would just take one small thing every week and he would get responses. The obvious model for this is Tom Fletcher, who was in the Lebanon, and he wrote this famous valedictory blog on which there were hundreds of comments. And of course, unfortunately, he left the Foreign Office to go and write a book. But that is where you might find proper engagement. I don't think you're going to get it on Twitter. I think you will rarely get it on Facebook. You might have it if there is a network, for example, as in India with diaspora. They have a very vigorous diaspora network. I think the Mexicans do the same thing. That is a specific objective, is to network with your diaspora. And diaspora obviously can be very influential agents in another country promoting the interests of your country. So in those circumstances, I think that there is a role for engagement, but generally not. And just with regard to engagement, I mean, I just want to raise two examples. One is President Trump's tweets, and they quite often, several heads of state, heads of government have responded to tweets, and my Prime Minister has been one of them recently, about right-wing nationalist sentiment in this country, and the rise of Islamic extremism, if you believe what's coming from Washington in this country. Does that kind of exchange help? I have a feeling not. The people who follow Trump, no doubt, are convinced that Britain is a hotbed of Islamic extremism, because they won't be interested in what the response has been. So I'm skeptical about all of that. The other one I wanted to mention, because there is one account that regularly gets several comments, and that is the account of the Foreign Office cat Palmerston. Now, he doesn't have as many followers as the official account, obviously, or the foreign minister, but he does have something like 13,000 or 17,000, which is probably more than some government institutions might have. Now, it's all good fun, of course, and he makes various little pointed remarks about British political leaders, etc., and everyone is very humorous, and people comment, is it advancing foreign policy, British foreign policy? I don't know. Is it worth doing? If people have a little bit of a laugh about Britain, they think their Foreign Office is stuffy and arrogant, perhaps it's not such a bad thing. But engagement, yeah, I'm skeptical about those platforms being useful for engagement. So I don't think we should get too neuralgic about it.
Thank you for these very, very clear remarks on to what extent can diplomats engage on social media. What I found interesting is that in part you also commented on the question of how do we measure success on social media, which was also one of the questions that came up in the chat. And I really liked the nuanced approach we were both advocating, because I think one of the things we really have to keep in mind, measuring success on social media can be done in a quantitative way only to a very, very limited extent. So as you said, like getting many likes does not equate to a successful social media strategy necessarily, or maybe not even at all. Related to that, there's another comment in the chat that I wanted to bring up, and that's the question basically of how to stay in control. And this came up in Liz's initial presentation, in the sense that the question, if social media is moving so fast, at the same time, if you want to check the content of a message, it takes a long time within the diplomatic service to agree on a certain communication message. So how can you square these two things? And there was one comment in the chat early on where basically the idea was we cannot check on our messages, we just have to send them, even as diplomats on social media. So what is your take on kind of staying in control about the message on social media as a foreign ministry, as a diplomat? Is that possible? Should that be desirable? What is your advice basically for diplomats using social media on attempting to control the message or not?
Well, if I can start, I would just say, I mean, if you're a diplomat, you don't need to control your message, because you know what your message is. And whether someone in Bulgaria is tweeting or writing a post about a particular government policy, or someone in Helsinki or someone in Mexico City, the basic message is always the same. And if you're a diplomat, you know what your government policy is, you know what your government position is, and you know how it should be presented. And if you don't know how to present a government position, you have no business opening your mouth at all. That's my view. But as for controlling other people's messages, you can't do that. All you can do is frame your own narrative and try to present it in a persuasive way. Depending on who you're trying to reach, you use the kind of language that your audience will relate to, and if you are honest, And I think going back to what Murrow said, if you're truthful, you will be credible and persuasive. So that's, in my view, what it comes down to. You can't control what other people will say, but you can perhaps react to it. But as for controlling what your own people are saying, I'm not in favor of having a long chain of command where someone wants to tweet something and then they send it to so-and-so and someone else approves it and then it goes to so-and-so and so. There's no time for that, and either you trust your diplomats or you don't trust them. If you don't trust them, don't let them work on social media. If you do, at least respect them enough to acknowledge that they will know what to say and how to say it.
I completely agree with what Liz said. Completely, 100%. I can subscribe. One thing I want to add, but just to underline what she said, is that there is no time. I mean, we have to accept that everything is going fast. We do accept that everything is liquid. So you cannot think of a chain of command for tweeting or something like that. It cannot work. Or if it works, it's completely ineffective. So at the end of the day, it doesn't work. But I think that now this is clear to everybody. The point is that you must have, in order to be effective in communicating, you must have people who are properly ready for this. And to be ready for this, it means two things. First of all, of course, to know the basics, or let's say the training. Second of all, it means the attitude. You know, it means that you should be proactive. If you are in a world where everybody is screaming or talking aloud, if you want somebody to hear your voice, in some cases, you cannot whisper. So you should learn how to talk aloud if needed, and do it, because if you learn and you don't do it. Why I say it is important also the fact of doing it, because I know and I see that there are many cases where people just do not use the tools for the simple reason that they are dangerous. You might say, you might write something wrong. Somebody could attack you. So, and of course what they do nothing, and that's it. So you have no risk. But are you doing your job? I don't think so. On the other hand, you must create the environment so that people can act. Because, of course, if I know that my boss will immediately, you know, criticize me, if after 3,000 tweets there is one tweet which is not well written or not correct 100%, then I will think about it. But if I know that I have a certain leverage, it doesn't mean that that I will say something completely wrong or misleading or causing God knows what case. Then if I have this kind of protection, I know that I can, react. I don't want to say engage, because we already discussed the engagement part, but react or act, be proactive, and therefore be effective in my communication. So these are the two elements. Thank you.
I think that's very important, and it kind of comes back to how can ministries of foreign affairs manage the social media use of diplomats, or how should they react, what kind of strategy should they have. And I think what I hear is that you basically need to trust your employees as a Ministry of Foreign Affairs. You need to trust that diplomats, as well-trained, highly trained officials, know what they're doing on social media. And I also hear that it's better to be on social media than not to be on social media. That's what I heard in Stefano's comment. We don't have much time left, but I think there's one big area of discussion that we haven't touched upon, and you might already guess what it is, which is related to fake news, bots on Twitter, and this idea of filter bubbles. So one question is, if there are so many different narratives on Twitter, so many different realities being talked about and being presented on Twitter, is there a task for diplomats to try and add as a corrective, to try and consolidate these very different narratives, very different realities that are out there? And then also, is there a way of engaging with communities that you would normally not engage with? In other words, is there a way for social media use by diplomats that would allow them to engage beyond the filter bubble? And by filter bubble, I mean not so much what algorithms do, but I mean the typical audience that would already listen to the British Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Is there a way of going beyond that and engaging with audiences that normally would not be already interested in what you're saying? So basically, fake news, filter bubbles, and with fake news, obviously, bots on social media, attacks where public opinion, where there are attempts to sway public opinion. I mean, these are very difficult questions, but maybe, and we only have 10 minutes left, but maybe just to give us an impression, what is your core advice regarding these topics that seem to be very, very pressing for a lot of people, especially now? I don't know, Liz, would you like to start, if that's all right?
Well, I mean, knowing what the answer is much more difficult than identifying the problem. I mean, the EU has tried to address the problem because they set up this East Stratcom task force about 2 years ago, specifically to counter disinformation from Russia. That was how they put it. And they have 14-member task force, and they have a website called EU versus disinfo, EU vs disinfo. And according to their website, they have identified and debunked 3,500 pieces of disinformation since they started. Now, this seems quite a lot, but 3,500 in 2.5 years, I don't know how many more are out there. You know, so I mean, it's a massive amount of work that needs to be done. And I don't know how many national administrations have got the resources to do it. You know, as for cyber bots and trolls and things, I think that NATO communications, they had commissioned a study on the use of bots in, how did they call it? They had a case study on Latvia on the use of bots in disinformation in campaigns in Latvia, and it was just, and again, Latvia is a small country, so you can do that in a country like that. But if you're doing it, if you're trying to address that kind of phenomenon in a large country, I think it's got the resources that most people can't muster, especially foreign ministries. And people have enough trouble finding the resources to maintain social media accounts, never mind dealing with all the threats from fake news. So I think, so I'm not sure what the answer is, other than you just have to hope that your own message, if it's repeated often enough and it's endorsed by enough other credible non-state actors, then it might eventually filter through. As for the non-traditional audiences, then again, I think we have to be more imaginative about using different mouthpieces, so that we don't just use our official spokespersons, but with campaigns especially, I've mentioned this before to people about the UK campaign against sexual violence in conflict, where the British Foreign Office worked with Angelina Jolie, who certainly had far more followers on Twitter than the Foreign Secretary would ever be able to muster. So if you're working with people who feel strongly about an issue, particularly if it's a campaign, then you can maybe get your own narrative out there and reinforce in a way that straight institutional tweeting will not do.
Okay, it's my turn. Sorry, I was caught up in another fascinating issue, which is on the chat, which is gamification. But that's maybe another time. On the fake news, let me share again. I quite agree with what Liz said, with her observations. And here again, I would like to add something on resources, because I think she rightly puts the accent on resources, but this is not something where we should give up. In the sense, if we think, if a country think, if an institution think that there is serious damage in terms of fake news, they have the responsibility, we have the responsibility to do something about it, and therefore to put resources on it. Let's move the attention to another issue which is similar in terms of approach. Do we think that cybersecurity is important to an institution? I mean, to be secure. Do we think that we should not be attacked or hacked by people? The answer is yes, of course. Now it's clear to everybody, not only to the banks. Okay? And what are we doing about it? We are investing in systems that counteract this action. The same is for fake news. If we think that our sector, foreign policy or Ministry of Foreign Affairs or a country, is really affected by fake news, then we have to put resources there. There is no other way. You have to counteract. There is no other way. But if we only talk about fake news just because we are aware that they are there and everything else, but they don't really affect you, then we will keep talking and that's it. But we have really to understand if it is really doing something to us, they are really harmful or not. Now, I don't give any answer. It very much depends on this. Let me conclude with one minor thing, which is social media. So we talked about social media, Twitter, Facebook. Of course, before when I was doing like this, Liz was talking on the social media links, I was thinking to LinkedIn, which I believe is very effective also to maintain contacts. But that's another thing. Let me talk 1 second about Wikipedia. Is it a social media or not? Well, that also we could discuss. But certainly it's social. Huh? On Wikipedia, there are many articles which are not correct. Many others are very good. It depends. I'm not saying that I'm not demonizing in any way Wikipedia, which I like at the end of the day. But there are some elements which are not correct. So if some of them are not correct and they are affecting, for example, our country, our work, our career, whatever, what we can do, or we should do, is invest time, because it takes time, and contribute. You cannot just say that they are not correct or they are harmful, and then do nothing. On a tool which is, the most consulted tool in terms of encyclopedic research. This is not correct, even for an institution. But we are not doing much about that. So we have to be active. I don't want to say proactive, but active. Not only, stating that there is something which is bad or evil or not going well. That's my point. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There are lots of topics we could still be debating, and I think we covered a very broad spectrum on social media use in diplomacy. But even with all the topics we covered, fake news, social media strategy, engagement versus sending out information, with each of these topics we could go into so much more depth. The other thing we need to point out is that digital diplomacy is obviously so much more than social media use. For today, we focused on social media, and I think with our two experts, Ambassador Stefani Baldi and Ms. Liz Galvez, we really covered lots of ground, and I think we really distilled some key lessons and some key advice. What I find interesting is that we have become a lot more critical with regards to social media use, but I think it's especially this kind of skepticism that will move us into the next phase of being more effective on social media, keeping all the new problems such as filter bubbles and fake news that we're facing right now in mind. So first of all, to conclude, I would like to thank very much our two excellent speakers who shared a wealth of experience and who drew on so many different examples and really were able to cover so much ground. So thank you so much, Stefano and Liz, for really giving us an enriching debate that spoke to so many people and that spoke to the also extremely intense discussion we had in the chat. Thanks to all our participants for having a very engaging discussion in the chat, for following us for this hour, and for bringing us to so many different and so many interesting topics. I have two quick announcements. First one is our next web debate will not be in January, but in February. So we will see each other on the first Tuesday in February with a new topic for you. You can find the link to register already in the chat. The other thing is there's another link that my colleague Barbara posted in the chat, which is the Geneva Engage Awards. In this case, the third Geneva Engage Awards, which we as Diplo Foundation will be giving on the 11th of December. And it's an award to recognize social media engagement of the missions in Geneva and international organizations in Geneva. So if you're in Geneva, 11th of December, the Geneva Engage Awards might be interesting for you. With all of that, thank you so much, and I hope to see you in February.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.